Hello, wrestling fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the We Can't Wrestle Podcast. It is episode 200. Dave Maxson, your host, here with you. And this week, it is a supersized edition of the show to celebrate, of course, the 200th edition of the We Can't Wrestle Podcast. I'll get into that in just a moment. First, just want to let everybody know that as we go forward here after episode 200, that you may see some changes here at the WNR Podcast Network. And actually, one of the reasons that I changed it from WrestleNet Radio to WNR is because of that branding. I believe that we have a lot more to offer than just wrestling. I think that for the past 6 years, we've boxed ourselves in as just a wrestling kind of programming. And I do love the wrestling. That stuff's not going to go away. Of course, Reliving the Extreme will continue. The We Can't Wrestle podcast will continue. You've noticed some of the other shows have fallen off just because it is what it is in the podcast business. But like I said, I think we have more to offer than just wrestling, so we're going to be starting to branch out into some other genres as well. A couple television review shows coming up. If you enjoy The Sopranos, we are going to have a Sopranos podcast. Justified, if you enjoy the TV show Justified, we're going to have a Justified podcast. And also I have a music-oriented podcast in the works as well. So lots coming to the WNR Podcast Network. Lots of change, but I think change for the good. It's going to give you all some variety, more shows to listen to. I know there's a billion podcasts out there, and we appreciate you listening to our shows here at WNR. Now, that being said, let's talk about episode 200 of the We Can't Wrestle Podcast, which I'm going to present to you right now. I have a lot to present you on this show. Later on in the show, I will be defending my trivia championship against Archie Mitchell, Mark Brew, and my brother Aaron. I'm currently the We Can't Wrestle Podcast Trivia Champion. My title defense coming up later in the show. Also in the show, we're going to have David Gold and John Majefski and myself with a discussion on the 25th anniversary of the Attitude Era in the World Wrestling Federation. Looking back on the Attitude Era, was it good? Was it bad? Some of the highlights, some of the lowlights of the Attitude Era. Also joining me on the show, a guy that I've waited to have on the show for a long time. We've tried to coordinate a few times. It just didn't work out. That's how it goes. But he's finally here for episode 200. The one and only, the host of Wrestling Nostalgia, Mr. Dave Dynasty. But the first thing I want to present to you is an interview that I did with the former managing editor of the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, the man who created the PWI 500. He actually wrote the first PWI 500, and I think some subsequently after that, a few of them, but a great journalist. And he has a podcast of his own, the Outdated Wrestling Hour. It is my pleasure on the 200th episode of the show to present you with an interview that I did with the one and only Bob Smith. So we're going to get everything started. The way this will roll out, we'll start with my interview with Bob, then my interview with Dave, then our conversation about the Attitude Era, and then, of course, the main event of the show will be the Trivia Championship, and I'll join you all at the end of this long, supersized edition of the We Can't Wrestle Podcast to wrap everything up. So, that being said, like I said, here we start with my interview with Mr. Bob Smith. All right, listeners, it is my pleasure to welcome as part of the 200th episode of the We Can't Wrestle Podcast. This week, I am joined by, dare I say, and I'll get into it deeper, but if you could imagine having your favorite comic book writer or somebody from your teen years on your own podcast, this is what I'm dealing with here, because I'm welcoming the former managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the host of his own podcast, the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Bob Smith.
I can't believe I made the 200th episode. I was looking at your episode count, because like I was telling you before you hit the record button, I've been binging on your show because I know I was going to be on this show.
Right.
And it's like, no way I'd make the 200th, but I'm honored to be here at such a milestone podcast. I appreciate it. I really do.
I didn't know if I was going to make it to the 200, to be perfectly honest with you. But yeah, it's a labor of love as a wrestling fan. And that's kind of what I was alluding to when I started here was, as a wrestling fan, I just have to tell you, and we'll get into some questions and stuff, but I have in my hands right here a copy of the very first ever Pro Wrestling Illustrated.
Oh my gosh.
And I want to tell you, Bob, it came out in 91. So 91, I was born in 78, so I'd have been 13.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine in the early to mid 90s was little me's Bible. Like I religiously, grandma took me to the candy store. I didn't want the candy. I don't want to buy the candy. I want to buy the wrestling magazine, and I want Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And the 500, I swear, I bet I read this thing through 100 times, because I grew up in Midwest in Ohio, the Toledo area. And we got WWF, we got WCW obviously on TBS, but there was no really, saw some of the Bruiser stuff, the Bruiser Bedlam stuff, but this magazine was my portal to the wrestling world at that time that I didn't get to experience, and it was just, I soaked it up. And I gotta say, I can't, and I'm not even blowing smoke here. I can't tell you how much I, as a wrestling fan, appreciate the work you put into that.
Oh, thank you very much. When I got the job with them in 88, I think it was 88 that I got hired, I was just like you as a kid, man. I had a 50-cent allowance. And I remember specifically on at least 2 or 3 occasions spending all the 50 cents on Wrestling World, or I'm a little older than you are, but Inside Wrestling, all the magazines were out at that point.
Mm.
And it came at a time when there was no wrestling on my local TV. Wrestling had left my area. I'm from the Albany, New York area originally. So it's like, it was no wrestling on, but I was hooked on it. So I was like, well, what do I do? So I started reading the wrestling magazines, which back then really was the way that wrestling fans got their information. There's no question about that. Up until probably about 1995, 96, it was still a vital way to get news out, because it was still territories back then.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the cable world, you couldn't see everything, but the next best thing was to read about it in the magazine. So I realized that when I got the job. I remember when I got hired, I was like, I don't believe this. I was so thrilled. And Mike Tyson got me the job with them.
No kidding.
Yeah, well, not spiritually, but not really. Here's why. I worked for a newspaper in Catskill, New York, where he used to train when he was just a tadpole, like 19, 20, 21 years old. And I had won a journalism award, a big one, for an interview I did with him.
Mm-hmm.
And what better resume fodder for a company that does wrestling and boxing magazines than an award-winning interview with the most famous boxer in the world?
Exactly, yeah.
So that was part of it. But I was hired on the wrestling end. And that's dream job. What can I tell you? It really was. Not to say I didn't work my ass off once I got in there, because it really was a lot of work. They put out a lot of product. I mean, as you probably have heard on other podcasts, I did the first 2 PWI 500s all by myself. But I think they gave me that job and agreed to let me do it because I had the knowledge base to do it. And that's kind of a compliment to me. I really think of every staffer that was there, I was the only one that could have done it at that point. For some reason, I absorbed everything about every territory. I watched tapes like crazy. Had a background of watching every wrestling show I could get my hands on. Mm-hmm. So I was the right guy, because not everybody in the staff was like that. A couple of staffers kind of like wrestling, but they weren't into it like I was. Mm-hmm. So I think I was the right guy to do the job.
And that's a kindred spirit wrestling fan thing too, because I'm the same way. As I grew up, I could watch what my mother was willing to pay for or whatever on cable, and et cetera, et cetera. And then as I got older and I got access to tapes and I got access, then the internet comes along and YouTube comes along, and then it's like this whole new world opens up. Now I've watched all of Mid-Atlantic. I've watched Memphis, which is the greatest wrestling territory ever. And I've watched Georgia. And it's just if you're a real wrestling fan, once you open that can, even the bad stuff, anything you can get your hands on, you're going to watch it.
Right. Well, there's the thing. When I was a fan, there was no bad stuff back then.
Right.
I really didn't feel that way. From the smallest federation to the WWF, I thought it was all good at many points. Nothing insulted my intelligence back then. And
I agree. I'm the same way. Like you said, I think I'm like, maybe fan wise, I'm maybe that was my first question I have for you. So let's just do that. What was your first introduction to the wacky world of professional wrestling, and what made you a fan?
Okay, I am from the Albany, New York area, and we had 3 TV stations to choose from pre-cable. Yes, I am pre-cable, folks. I was around before we used to have to put antennas on our garages and stuff like that, which we did. And we had channel 6, 10, and 13, and channel 6 was WRGB from Schenectady, New York, a famous wrestling station in terms of history because they used to broadcast live matches from that TV station in the 40s and 50s. I didn't know that. I think his name is Brett Williams on Facebook, who does an incredible job uncovering stuff from the Northeast of New York State, publishes these things. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that till like 3 weeks ago. So the guy, hats off to you, buddy, because you're doing a great job. In 1969 or 1970, this is how old I am, okay? A little tadpole Bob sits in front of the TV, and I discover a show called Championship Wrestling with Johnny Powers, which was Pedro Martinez's old NWF federation from Buffalo. They used to promote Buffalo, Cleveland, Utica, New York, and Albany, which I thought was a long way for them to travel, but they did. And they had an incredible roster. I mean, Johnny Powers, Ernie Ladd, the Mongols, George Crybaby Cannon, Eric the Red, Kurt Von Hess, Abdullah the Butcher after a while. I mean, just people you wouldn't expect for a federation that did 2 states, right? So I started watching this thing, and I was hooked. Oh, Dick the Bulldog Brower, too, who remains one of my all-time favorites. So I start watching the show, and I'm like so hooked on it. One time, somebody slammed Powers over the head with a belt. It's the first time I ever saw a wrestler bleed. Jack Reynolds was the host. He's going, "That's not fake blood, ladies and gentlemen. How could you expect to get hit over the head with a belt and not bleed?" You know, it was just, it was a studio show, by the way. Their show was a studio show similar to Memphis or Pittsburgh. So I'm hooked on this thing, and then it goes off. Like I told you, there was no wrestling. I think it was on for a year and a half. I guess they weren't drawing the crowds in the Albany area, and they promoted all over upstate New York, but I guess they decided it wasn't worth the trips. Actually, they only lasted until 74 anyway, I think. So anyway, to make a long story short, I'm buying wrestling magazines. There's nothing going on until late 72, early 73, and here comes the WWF on the same station at the same time. Gold. It was back, and it was bigger. You know, and who's the first wrestler that I saw on that show? Bulldog Brower, the same guy I had seen.
Hey, there you go.
Well, that must mean Bulldog Brower is the biggest star in the world. Remember, I'm a little kid at this point because he's all over all these shows. But then, you know, I think the tag team champs were Pedro was the champion at that point. So this must have been 72, 73. Oh, no, it was 72 because the tag team champions were Sonny King and Chief Jay Strongbow. See, yeah, I still got it. You know, I can still remember this esoterica from back. Anyway, I never missed it. And as I moved into my high school years, I had a friend with a car. My best friend in high school, Rick Stickles, with his beat-up beige Volkswagen. We'd go to Albany to see at the Washington Avenue Armory all the local cards that were there. And it was WWF. You know, it was Superstar Billy Graham and Maivia and Strongbow and Van Raschke and all the stars you could name from the East Coast. So I was hooked. 10 years later, after that, I was working for PWI. It helped that I got a job with my hometown newspaper as sports editor and did the work with Tyson and stuff like that. But I had that huge knowledge base of all that stuff from upstate New York. And I read wrestling magazines voraciously, even as an adult, because it was still the way that, you know, I didn't know who Meltzer was until I joined PWI, to be honest with you. So, and that was 88, and he had been around for years by that point. So basically, I'm just like everybody else. I was just a voracious fan who got lucky.
Was the TV show that you got, the WWF TV show, would that be the stuff that was filmed in Allentown or Hamburg?
We got both of them.
Okay.
We got because we had cable came in soon afterwards. So Channel 9 in New York had, I don't know which had which, but we had both All-Star Wrestling and Championship Wrestling from WOR and WRGB. And then a third station picked up one of the other shows a week later. Like they would show what Channel 9 had on a week later. I don't know why, but that's the way they did it. Mm-hmm. They would continue to promote at that Armory until I think it got really popular. They moved to, I think, the Glens Falls Civic Center, which was a small hockey arena. And then after the expansion, they just exploded. And they, SummerSlam 92 was done at the Knickerbocker Arena in Albany, which is brand new at that point. And that was a full-size 20,000 seat venue. So Albany has quite a history when it comes to pro wrestling, and I was there for a lot of it.
I think just by judging by what you were saying, I think I probably came along in the wrestling ether about a decade after you, because my first memory is, and I just remember it distinctly. And when I met Hulk Hogan, I told him about it. And it's a funny story, but I remember seeing, it was right before Hulk Hogan became the champion. So it was probably like late 83 or something. He had just come back to the WWF. And he and Bob Backlund actually teamed up against, I think it was Mr. Fuji and Tiger Chung Lee. And I just vividly remember the Victory Sports banner in the background. And when I told Hulk Hogan about that, he goes, "Brother, I don't even remember that." So, but that's my first memory was right before the cusp of Hulkamania. So,
speaking of Hulkamania too, I moved into Ulster County after a while, after living in Greene County, which is a bigger county, and they moved their TV tapings sometime in the 80s to the Mid-Hudson Civic Center in Poughkeepsie, which was not far from where I lived. So I started attending the TV tapings. So I attended probably 6 or 7 of them, and it was quite a hoot. Like I'd be sitting there in the upper area, not at ringside, but in the bleachers part. It was an arena, so I had seating. And here comes Pat Patterson eating a bag of potato chips, just walking up the aisles as if he's just at home there, and It was a trip because it was a medium-sized arena, if you remember those tapings. Remember the famous Andre haircut?
Yes.
That was the Mid-Hudson Civic Center in Poughkeepsie.
I think in my brain, what sticks out to me most, just probably because, again, when you're a fan, but I remember all the Monday Night Raws from that arena. So that arena definitely has a place in my brain as far as a wrestling venue goes.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it wasn't that much longer that I actually was working in the business, which just freaks me out to this day, because I went from hyperactive fan to someone who had the keys to the car, sort of, started to learn all the secrets, because I didn't know. I wasn't anything near an insider when I started, but once you spent 6 months there, you knew just about everything.
That was actually by
Craig Peters and Stu Sachs. These guys knew everything. I mean, Bill Apter to this day is a walking encyclopedia, and he was the conduit between most of the federations or organizations and the wrestlers themselves. Everybody knew Bill. Everybody liked Bill. So at the magazines, he would communicate all the stuff that he found out to us, and that's how we put the magazines together. To be honest, without Bill Apter, we would have been squat. Bill Apter was a giant in terms of who he knew, how to get information. He really was. He was it. I'll be honest with you. He's on my show that comes out. I don't know when this podcast comes out, but as we speak tomorrow, he's going to be a guest on my show, and we talked about that. The fact that without Apter, I don't know what we would have done. I don't know what they're doing now. I know that the magazine's still in print and new people have taken it over and stuff like that. But back in those days, Bill would get the info. He'd parlay it to us. He'd hand us the photographs because we had a team of photographers all over the country and all over the world at times. And we would base our articles off the information he gave us. Totally invaluable. What a guy.
And
so if anybody complains to you that Apter didn't write this or this isn't, take it from me, and I wouldn't hype you. Bill Apter was 75% of the success of that company, no question about it.
Yeah, there's a reason they call them the Apter Mags. It's
according to Bill, Meltzer gave it that name, and people just picked up on it.
But yeah, I didn't know Meltzer coined that phrase, the Apter Mags. So.
Meltzer definitely coined that phrase. Yeah.
So my next question, I guess, and it kind of parlays into what we were just talking about. I know you said you were a newspaper journalist, and then I know you said the Mike Tyson interview was you kind of credit that, but was that, I guess what I'm saying is, were you looking for a job when PWI came to you, or how did it all come to be for you to work there?
This is hilarious. I was working. I had a new job working in a music magazine. That's all I'll say, because I wasn't there long enough to even say, but it was a national music magazine. And I just started there, and I would still pick up the New York Times every Sunday just to see. If you can imagine, back then they had an entire section of classified ads for jobs. It was part of the paper, like 30 pages of it. And 3 or 4 of them were all editorial work. Oh, it was heavenly. You got to miss it, But anyway, I see this little 2-line ad. I swear this is the truth. Little 2-line ad says editor/writer wanted for sports entertainment mag. And I went, sports entertainment, that's wrestling. Send resume, clips to box something, RBC NY. I went, oh, RBC, Rockville Center. That's the Apter mags. So I knew who they were. Just I could read it. And I sent in the Tyson clip, and I sent in a few other things. And I got the phone call. I was like, wow. And I went in for my interview and pretty much nailed it. I really did. I had a lot of knowledge, and I know I aced the writing test they gave me. And I talked about so I think they hired me as a wrestling boxing guy at first, because I wrote 3 or 4 boxing articles when I first started there.
Okay.
And actually helped Bill do a photo session with Mike Tyson, because I knew Mike. And so that way it just, it cooled the ice, and Bill could do whatever he wanted, because he knew I was working, Mike knew I was working with Bill, and I had carte blanche because we were old friends. So to make a long story short, I fluked into it. It's just an ad in a newspaper. And I don't know how many people they interviewed. I think somebody had just left, and they hired 2 people, myself and a guy named Gersh Kuntzman, who went on to become a big time writer in New York City. But I just totally fluked into it. It was awesome. What a feeling. I mean, the very magazines I used to walk to the candy store to buy, even as an adult, I was about to work for. You don't know what that felt like. It was like lottery. You won the lottery.
Yeah, I can't imagine how cool.
But in your mind and your heart, it's like I couldn't have gotten luckier. Could not have gotten luckier.
And as you work there, and of course we already hit on the 500, but I'll ask another question about that in a minute. But I guess it interests me as a kid that read the magazine, because we all know that there was some carte blanche with the magazines as far as storylines and stuff goes, as far as with storylines within the magazines that weren't necessarily playing out on television or what have you. Did you guys have, when you worked there, did you have much access to the actual wrestlers?
Everywhere but WWF.
Okay.
WWF had started their own magazine and threw out all the magazines from ringside. Didn't allow them passes anymore. And even at the big arenas, they were kind of strict at kind of watching people to see if they weren't shooting commercially, because they wanted entire access for their own house magazine and nothing else. Mm-hmm. So, which leads to another funny story. Let me just do this while I'm thinking about it. We used to sneak into Madison Square Garden with 300 level seats with our long lenses stuffed in the Subway sandwich bags. Right? Make people think we were bringing a Subway sandwich in instead of yeah. And we would just shoot, hide the camera, shoot, hide the camera, shoot. So we kept shooting at WWE events. If you notice, during that period between 88 and about 94, there were always ring ropes in the pictures, because we were shooting from, not ringside, but up, shooting down. And you couldn't avoid having, but I think we did a hell of a job considering what we had to deal with. And so that was part of the problem back then. Back to your original question, though, which was, our storylines. I was one of the writers who kind of stuck to what the organizations were doing because I did a lot of indies writing. I actually preferred doing USWA, World Class, Continental, whatever, Calgary, anything like that. Mainly because how many times can you do a Hulk? We were doing Hulk Hogan so much that I tired of it and I wanted to do the other stuff. So they let me. It was no problem. But in terms of, I remember one time I got a little heat from WCW/NWA for an article I did about the Four Horsemen and how Sid was getting upset with them, but not showing it, which was total. Got a little heat for overstepping my bounds. And that's the one time personally I can recall a little bit of flack. It was worse in the old days when Bill Apter or somebody, Stanley Weston, back when Bruno was champion, did an article about Bruno fighting the Nazis or something like that. And Bill got a lot of heat from Bruno Sammartino himself. He said, that's too much. He said, nothing like that ever happened. Please. I had enough trouble in real life in that situation. And there were other stuff that, during the course of the history of those magazines, the London magazines, Apartment House Wrestling and, stuff that, some wrestlers didn't really cotton to being on the cover of a magazine where next to it was two girls in bikinis, pretending to fight each other, So there was that caused a little controversy too back in the day, but it was before my time. Mm-hmm. And the silly stuff, the Matt Brock, the Liz Hunter, the heel writers we had, Eddie Elner when I was there, preceded by the great Dan Shaka, who was one hell of a writer. I mean, he just wrote like a TV script writer. He was excellent. So, once in a while somebody would write something about somebody that was a little inflammatory, we'd hear about it. But, again, it was the era where we were working hand in hand with the promoters, and also some people really needed or liked the publicity. They didn't care what it was. So you took the good with the bad, I guess.
Yeah. I had a while, I don't know, some episodes back, I actually had Brian Solomon on the show, and he was discussing, his time at WWE magazine and stuff. And that's why I wanted to ask you, because I know to what he was discussing with me, WWE has always been in and out as to how much access they're going to give. Sometimes we're okay with the other magazines. Sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're good with the wrestling press. Sometimes we're not. So I just wasn't sure at your time, during your time there, what the access to them was. So
it depended on how business was too. I'll tell you something. When they had the debut of Raw at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City, we got carte blanche again. The ratings had been down. They were reduced to running that small venue for their TV again because things were really hurting for a while. And they invited us. I remember about 5 of us went to the debut show with passes, which we had never had before, including Apter, who hadn't been in ringside in years. So things change. You know how business is. If they need you, they come calling. If they think they're too big for you, they'll amscray. It's like it's just the way it is. Wrestling has always been such a closed shop anyway that anybody who gets a ringside pass is lucky. Because especially me, it was still kayfabe into the mid-90s, no question about it. I remember visiting Memphis once, and I had to use the men's room backstage at the Channel 5 show, and I walked into this room. I asked somebody, where's the men's room? They pointed to the room. So I walk into the room, this big room with the men's room as part of the room. But I didn't know that Eddie Marlin, Jerry Jarrett, and Eric Embry were working the book as I walked in. So when I walked in, even though they knew who I was and why I was there, they gave me the saucer eyes because it's like, oh gosh, she's going to hear this. So it was definitely still kayfabe like crazy back then,
That's a name, Eric Embry. What a fucking talent that doesn't get the credit he deserves. But he's my favorite. I call it, I don't know what the term is. He's my favorite crybaby heel. That's what I call it, crybaby heel. But he's my favorite of all time in that category.
What he was putting down in Memphis, he was slightly crazy, slightly sane, slightly a genius. I'm talking on camera. Slightly a lunatic. He was a little of all of it. You couldn't describe what he was. He was not a big guy and certainly not a body beautiful, but he had an anti-charisma that really worked. And he pulled it off. What he did in Memphis and Texas afterwards.
Yes. And that, to be honest with you, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like my first exposure to him, again, because I've seen it all now, but my first exposure to him was actually when Global was on ESPN.
Right.
And that was the first time I ever saw him. So, yeah.
And that was a great angle. I mean, even though you had Phil Hickerson playing a giant Japanese guy, which is beyond incredible, but nobody knew it. Nobody complained. The fans never said, "Boo! We know who you are." So, and I think part of that was because Hickerson was in Texas as opposed to Memphis, and they didn't know. I don't think he looked remotely Japanese, but that's Tojo Yamamoto was his manager, and I guess that 1 and 1 make 2.
Yeah.
That was a good program, and that may have been the last legit sellout that the Sportatorium ever had. Was when Eric beat Tojo to change it to the USWA instead of World Class, and that was a legit sellout. And I think that may have been the last one. I'm probably totally wrong, but I have a feeling I'm not that far from being right either.
No, I was going to say you're definitely not far off. If no matter what, it's on one of the shows that the other show that I do, the Reliving the Extreme show, the ECW show. We were just talking about the Sportatorium. And the reason we were is because Steve Austin, we're on the episodes now where Steve Austin is coming into ECW, and he talks about how he's been in the Sportatorium, but compared to that, the ECW arena is a dump. And I was telling the guys, the company that I worked for back in 2002, we had a managers conference in Dallas, and I actually got to drive past the Sportatorium. Obviously, by that point, nobody was doing anything with it. You can't go inside or anything, but it's just cool to know that I got to drive past it. And then I think they tore it down the next year. But it's cool to be able to say I saw the Sportatorium at least, from the outside looking in, and it's all run down and everything by that point. But
that Memphis trip, I was going to make it 2-pronged. I was going to fly into Memphis, do one show there, and then drive to the Sportatorium. Where I think Pedicino was still working it at that point. It didn't work out. It would have killed me, and it was just too far. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad I spent a week in Memphis instead, because I learned so much and got to meet Sabu when he was a kid and Rob Van Dam when he was a kid and that whole crew there. And I saw 2 shows, and I think that's my favorite experience of my PWI years, was spending a week in Memphis. It was worth it.
Actually, that's funny that you said that, because my next question was what I was going to say. If you could give me just an example, 1 or 2, I was going to say, what are your best and worst experiences working for them?
That's a really good question. Best experiences was Memphis. I will say the PWI 500, even though it was a killer, it really was hard to put together. Oh, gosh, pre-internet, think about that.
Yeah. Oh, and hey, we just rolled into my next question, because my next question was, how the hell did you put that together? But so we got 2 questions here.
This is why I think it was the right guy on the staff to do the job, because I'm telling you, 75% of it was right out of my head. The other 25% I had to research, but we did keep records. We had a office record book of wrestler. It was just one line for each wrestler, but it said where they're from, the bio, the weight, the height, year debuted, the whole. So we had a tiny bio of each wrestler right there. And it said Abdul the Butcher debuted in 1955, which drove me. I would use that for some. Others were people that I knew and stuff like that. Yeah, it was hard work. You know what? The reason I consider it one of my favorite things is because of the impact it's had then to now. And I had no expectation that the wrestlers would end up taking it as seriously as they did even then. I remember Chris Candido seeing him somewhere and go, I went down 50 spots. Why did I go down 50 spots? And I went, holy smokes. I didn't anticipate this. And then a couple other guys who I won't even mention didn't end up on it because of we had a computer snafu one year and knocked out a few guys from the letters G to H. So Terry Gordy didn't make it, and I think Owen Hart got left out. I didn't leave them out. The computer just bogged down or something, and they got vaporized. And I'll be damned if we didn't hear about that too. So, yeah, they took it serious. If you weren't on it, they didn't like it. If they were too low, they didn't like it. If they were way high, they loved it. Man, right from the start, Now, other good memories. The friends I've never lost. Bill Apter, Craig Peters, Stu Sachs. I hope they feel the same way. Roy London, Andy Rodriguez, Al Bello, who works for Getty Images now. The whole team there, Dave Rosenbaum. Later on, a guy named Chris Bernucca and Gersh Kuntzman that I talked about. I felt friendly with all of them. The boxing staff, my gosh, Steve Farhood and Bobby Cassidy, who's still working in boxing, and Steve Farhood is working on Broadway boxing on SMY. And, it's just, they've all gone on to great things. And I was there for their formative years. And I sat right next to Steve Farhood, who's a boxing encyclopedia. It was just, I didn't know what I had when I had it. I mean, I really had a really good deal there. My worst memories. Being scared to death to write an article about Nikita Koloff's wife dying. I wrote an article when his wife was terminally ill. I don't know if his wife or his girlfriend. It's been so many years, I just don't remember. But the woman he was involved with, and she ended up passing away not long after the article came out. And it's the hardest thing to do because when you write for a somewhat exploitive wrestling magazine, and you have to turn on your news hat and not like over exploit this situation. What's more important than life and death? I mean, come on. And Nikita turned out to be a great guy about it. And the young lady was just fantastic with her interview. And it turned out to be a fantastic article, unlike anything you'd usually read in a wrestling magazine. But it scared me. It was hard. It was very hard to do. I'm used to writing about, Eric Embry cutting Eddie Marlin's hair after a match or something like that. This was the exact opposite of that. Mm-hmm. And that was tough, but I wouldn't say it's one of the worst, but one of the hardest things I had to do. Worst experience was the day that Stanley Weston walked in and said, I'm selling the magazine to a company in rural Pennsylvania called Kappa Publishing, that does crossword puzzle magazines. And I could not go with them. I had to leave. I had just bought property a year and a half before, right down the road. I could walk to work. Boom. Cosmic screwing. I don't blame Stanley for selling. He was older and wanted to get out, and he got a nice hunk of change for selling it. But by the same token, I was left out in the COLD. I could not stay with them. I continued to freelance for them for about a year and a half, but it wasn't the same. And I left when I got an offer for triple the money for Wrestling's Main Event, which Sandy Krebs. Yeah, I wrote for other magazines, through other companies. I was executive editor of WCW's second version of their magazine with Colin Bowman as the owner of that mag. And then Bill calls me after that and has me freelance for WOW. You remember WOW magazine?
Yes. I actually have in my magazine collection, I have the entire run of that magazine. So,
wow, really? So my name's in a couple of them anyway. But in any event, so every time I got out of it, somebody called me. For about 5 years after I left PWI, I was still writing. Between you and me, the wall, nobody read WCW magazine, so nobody even knew I was there. It was like, and I'm not putting Colin's magazine down, but all three versions nobody read. I mean, it was like, and people forget London did, my company PWI did the first WCW magazine, and then Colin got the rights to it for a few years, and then some bright guy at WCW said, "Let's do it ourselves," and it lasted a handful of issues, and it died. So, like everything with WCW, it died, But yeah, so the tough thing for me was having to leave. I didn't want to leave. I wasn't planning on it. I obviously thought I was part of the scenery because I bought property right near where right where the magazine was. But so then I had to go in the real world, and that wasn't easy. Well, I stayed in publishing all those years. In fact, I was in publishing straight through April of 2021, which is amazing. That's a long run. The last 17 years I spent doing an entertainment magazine in Long Island. So it's like I never stopped doing publishing. So, it's been worth it. But I always look back to my favorite job. What can I tell you?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, if you are ever, I know you said you were listening to some episodes of the show. If you ever have downtime, some time on your hands, just so you know, I don't know if I told you before, but there is actually, I believe it's a 9 or 10 episode run of this show where we literally went through the entire first PWI 500. Every star, every bio.
I did not know that.
500 to 1, just, yeah. And
what did you guys end up talking about? I mean, did you disagree with the rankings or something like that? Or did you kind of take a trip down memory lane, so to speak?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What it did more was just, it was a great rock for a conversation, because oh yeah, I remember Dead-Eye Dick or I haven't thought about that guy in years or whatever, like example I have here. Like I said, I brought the magazine with me because I'm a fanboy. Number 500 in the first 500 was Zeus.
Yes.
And Bob's bio of Zeus reads, Tiny Lister Jr. is a fine character actor who starred in the 1989 film No Holds Barred, then tried to wrestle. Disastrous results, still wrestles in quotations, but ... So you get the idea.
I got a little snark in there, huh?
Yeah, a little bit.
I didn't think much of his skills, and frankly, nobody else did either. That's a little mean, isn't it? And I was even meaner the next year because I remember who 92s. What you remember? Who 92s? Number 500 was?
Is it Morgus the Maniac?
You got it. You nailed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I never even seen that guy, but that description in the magazine.
To call him ridiculous would be an insult to ridiculous wrestlers. I mean, it was a bad act. I'm sorry. Morgus, wherever you are, I'm sorry. But he was an East Coast indie guy who I think came out in a straitjacket, and I think his mom was the nurse that assisted him to the ring. It's worse than it sounded. Okay. Maybe his dad was part of it too. I can't even, but today it would be normal.
Yeah.
He'd be AEW Pacific Coast champion at this point. So,
just a couple of more questions. The other show that we do, I do the show Reliving the Extreme with my brother Aaron, and then Chad Austin, who used to wrestle for ECW and Maryland Championship Wrestling. He's our other co-host on the show. And of course, what we do on there is we're actually going week to week. We just literally started at the beginning, wherever WWE has it on Peacock, and we've watched and reviewed each episode of ECW and watching the progression of the company. But I know, and folks, definitely, we'll talk about Bob's podcast for sure at the end, but one of the better episodes that I've enjoyed the most, and I love them all, but I love the Todd Gordon episode. So I know from that you actually were originally one of the play-by-play guys for ECW.
I was more than that. I was the first host of the very first ECW shows in Philadelphia that only went into the airwaves and vaporized. It wasn't cable, so it was and it started out in a little rinky-dinky house somewhere, and then he found a new, I think his name was Filippelli, the second producer, who was really a major league guy. And then the show got kind of slick. And I did the first 5-10 shows that they ever did. And I tried my hand at play-by-play, which, by the way, ended up on WWE Network. Knocked me down with a feather. My color man was Stately Wayne Manor, I think he was with Wrestling World at the time. And I thought it sucked when I left the arena that day. And I said, I'm going to stop doing this. You're terrible. Forget it. So anyway, 30 years later, it ends up on WWE Network. And I'm going, what? It was in, the Hidden Gems section.
Yes.
And it had what obviously was dubbed from an OVHS tape of something called ECW's Bloodiest Bouts or something. And it's me and Wayne did 3 matches on. I went, that really wasn't bad. I had put myself down for all these years saying I don't have the right resonance in my voice to be a play-by-play guy. And I listened to this thing, and I had good chemistry with Wayne. We were arguing with each other, and it sounded natural and real. And the wrestlers were like, it was at a place called the Chestnut Cabaret, and they were hitting each other over there with beer cases, and it was like a big bar place.
And I was going to ask you, is because I know in the earlier episodes that are on Peacock, during the opening video, there's stuff that looks like it's from like a sports bar or something that you see Jim Neidhart and
yes.
Okay.
Well, the first shows he did were at a place called Michael Jack's right in Center City, Philadelphia, which is owned by Mike Schmidt, the old Phillies third baseman.
Okay.
And then he moved from there to the Chestnut Cabaret, which was a much larger nightclub. And I didn't last with him much longer than that. And before I knew it, I don't know how they got into that ECW arena, which is now 2300 Arena in Philadelphia. And boy, did they take off fast. Holy smokes. But you know what? Todd was the right guy. Todd had a real abiding love for old school. But he told me on a show he wanted to do Memphis in Philadelphia. But he did Memphis times 60, like take the Tupelo concession stand brawl and put it on steroids, so to speak. That was ECW even in the beginning. And the rest is history. And Joey Styles, people don't remember, was an intern for PWI for a while.
I did not know that either.
Yeah. In fact, I believe I was there the day he met Paul Heyman. And the two of them went into our conference room and were talking a mile a minute to each other. And I said, man, I can smell something cooking in there. These guys are getting along famously. And before I knew it, Joey was the lead voice of ECW. I mean, it's cool. It was cool to be part of that much history, you know? It really was.
Yeah, and actually, I think there is, man, and I would have to go back and check. But just from watching the show for the podcast, I really do think there is something. Did you do even after Joey took over the play-by-play? Did you do like a guest spot?
Yes.
Where you did some commentary with him? Okay, because I was going to say I swore I remembered in one of the shows that we watched for the podcast that you were there with Joey because they do some kind of a spot with the Eagle's Nest and.
Well, what happened was, pardon me, something happened here. Okay. Let me restart. Yeah. They said I got there and got to Philadelphia and I was going to stay overnight in the hotel where they were staying at. And I check into the hotel and Todd says, you're going to have a roommate. I said, who? He said, you find out. It's Joey. So we roomed that night, but he says, since you're here, why don't you do some color? You used to be on TV. You do some color with me. I said, fine. I don't know if Heyman liked it, but I ended up doing 3 or 4 matches on color. So anyway, at the end of one of the matches, Public Enemy had a match, and they came up into the crow's nest and beat the living crap out of Joey Styles, legit. And Joey didn't know it was coming. And I don't know why they did it. I guess it was a rib. But I hauled ass. I mean, I got out of there because I didn't want to be next. Who knows?
Right.
Who knows? It's ECW. And that was ECW by that point, real ECW. So I was like, holy smokes. So yes, that was the incident in the crow's nest with Bob Smith and Joey Styles. So
okay.
most of Joey. Oh my man, they laid him out.
What a thing.
Wow, those guys.
Well, my last question for you, Bob, and this is a question that I enjoy asking, especially other wrestling fans, especially when I have someone like yourself, or I've had Barry Rose on before, just a writer or a historian or somebody of that nature that I know is as big a wrestling fan as I am. If you could only watch 1 year, one promotion, what would it be? 1 year of one promotion for the rest of my life. What is it? What's your
one that I'd seen or not seen? Like you just pick history or
pretty much. It's pretty much your favorite. Or I mean, you can interpret the question however you like.
Really easy. 1980 WWF Bruno Larry Zbyszko. The greatest angle in the history of the World Wrestling Federation to this day, in my mind. I was so entranced by it from the very first moment that Larry Zbyszko ignored Bruno trying to get an interview with him outside the ring after a match. I went out and spent $1,000 on a VCR. You remember how expensive they were? Well, you're too young. VCRs were real expensive when they first came out. And I said, something's cooking here. I got to get this on tape. I could feel it. So I started taping each weekly show leading up to the match they had at Shea Stadium, and it was such a realistic, good angle with it. Probably the bloodiest moment in WWF TV history when he bashed him over the chair and the blood's running out of his head as he's laying there prone in the ring. All my favorite stars were around at that point, from Zbyszko to him to my favorite wrestler of all time, who I won't mention because it's ridiculous. My favorite wrestler of all time happens to be the most reviled, or one that a lot of fans hold in low esteem. Favorite wrestler of all time because in 1975 I saw him in Albany start a near riot just by sneering, and I said, "Boy, this guy's got bad guy charisma coming out of his butt." He was, and they were serious. The fans were hot. I thought we were going to have a row there. He never said anything. He just sneered, just walked down the aisle and sneered at everybody. So I was a fan of his for life after that because I like bad guys better, I think. But in any event, no, he was still there. You had Torquemada, you had Blassie as a manager, you had Lou Albano, who the tag team champions were, you had the Valiant Brothers. All these guys it was really hot. Dusty Rhodes was in and out, I was so into it. I spent $1,000 on a VCR. So that's got to be here. It just has to be.
The talking about Cicluna, to be honest with you, again, he was a little before my time, but I'll be honest, have gone back now through my life. Obviously, now I've gone back and watched as much as I possibly could. My mind, when I was first discovering him, when I first got to see some of the older 70s and 80s stuff, mostly when WWE started releasing that stuff on their DVDs, was I, honest to God, thought, why wasn't this guy a bigger deal? Why is this guy always doing the job? So I saw I think I saw the same thing in him that you did. He came off to me as a cool heel.
But here's the thing. He was a big deal. It was just a long time before those videotapes. He was a championship contender in 66 and 67. He was a world tag team champion. For he had such a long career. I think he wrestled from the late 50s to 1984, if you count when he was in Canada as Mike Valentino. But nobody sees the stuff when he was in his prime. There is a tape on YouTube I'll tell you about him and Victor Rivera taking on Antonio Inoki and another Japanese wrestler in Japan in 1967. In one of the falls, Cicluna pins Inoki.
Oh, shit.
You can look it up. It's on YouTube right now. Just type in him and Victor Rivera, it'll come right up. Which goes to show you he was a big deal at one point. Because believe it or not, in 1966, 67, he was a legitimate 6'8", 6'7", 6'8". That was towering over everybody in those days. Giants weren't quite as big as they are now.
Yeah. So
he was considered one of the larger wrestlers. And he had a really good, what I call a good bad guy charisma. He would just sneer. He had that look, this countenance, like, you're not worthy of my time, you peasants, as with the cape and everything. And, and the Cicluna King Curtis tag team was more vicious than the Road Warriors. Seriously. They would pick up scraps of stuff off the floor and gouge people with them and bash people over the head with chairs. And in 72, that was, kind of a precursor to hardcore. Seriously. So listen, just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen, kids. And people say, why is he a member of the Hall of Fame? Well, he was a worldwide star for the first half of his career. He just happened to like working for Vince Sr. and he lived locally and just continued to work for him, like Johnny Rodz did. Johnny Rodz is as good a wrestler as anybody I've ever seen, and people say he's just a jobber. Get out of here. Everybody has a role they don't know about, in wrestling. Sonny Blaze told me that he was an enforcer for the WWF. Like, if a young guy got a little bit too big for his britches, they'd send him to Johnny Rodz. So, you know what I'm saying? So, because Johnny Rodz could stretch you. So yeah, this is why I'm enjoying doing the podcast, is I'm learning little tidbits of fun like that. It's like the stuff I always suspected is actually turning out to be true.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned that it's just because you mentioned him. Another person that as soon as I got access, like the internet hit and or YouTube or whatever, another guy that I went back and watched because I was fascinated by him was Curtis Iakea.
Yes.
So because I was a teenager in the 90s, literally my first, I guess I vividly remembered him as the Wizard, with Kamala in the WWF, but like then the goofy Dungeon of Doom thing, Sullivan, my son, that whole deal. And yeah, so it was like, I want to go back and see the badassedness of this guy. And there's not a ton of him out there, but what I can find, if I can find it, I find it.
No, he was as over the top as any heel. I mean, good gosh, I'd put him half a notch below the Sheik, to be honest with you. I mean, he was using all kinds of foreign objects. There's a videotape of him stabbing somebody in the back of the head with what looks like a dagger. From the 70s, no less. I mean, he was maniacal. He had another head like a roadmap from gigging so much. His matches were really another precursor to hardcore. Even against TV jobbers, he would slam them over the head with chairs, and he was out of control. Was the best way to put it.
Yeah, and he's as I've gone back and watched him, he's
funny. He didn't talk all that much in those early years.
Yeah,
somebody discovered he had that big voice, and he started to become a manager type for Kevin Sullivan and stuff like that. Actually, he did way better with Championship Wrestling from Florida when they brought him in to work with Sullivan there, and in ICW too. That worked a little better than the corny stuff they ended up doing with Hogan and WCW. That was, wasn't it? Gosh,
some of the worst stuff ever. It's funny because you look and it's like there's talent there. Look at all this talent, but look how we're using it.
Well, I had 2 stints in WCW magazine, and I left Colin at one point because I remember it was a Monday night watching, I guess it was Nitro, and it was Hogan and some other fossil against Kevin Sullivan and Arn Anderson, and they were just going through the motions. And I said to myself, this is actually funny. I said to myself, this ain't going nowhere. It's played. It's done.
I think the person you're referring to is probably the team with Hogan is probably Brutus Beefcake when he was the Booty Man.
Yeah. So I called Colin. I go, I don't want to do this anymore. He said, why? I said, the product is ugh. About less than a month later, Scott Hall walked in the ring. Good timing, Bob.
Yeah, the world changed
in one instant. And it was like, holy smokes. But I ended up coming back anyway. Colin called me out of the blue, said, you sure you don't want to write some more? And I said, yeah, okay. So Colin was great. I'd like to know what he's doing now. He's in Florida somewhere, but he did the best he could with the wonderful, brain trust at WCW who would fight you no matter what you wanted to do in your magazine. It was really hard because you'd have to get clearances from like 5 different people in Atlanta, and they were never there. You know what I'm saying? It was just very hard and frustrating thing to put together. And he did a really good job with what he was given.
If the stars wouldn't have aligned and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall wouldn't have come in and Hulk Hogan wouldn't have agreed to turn heel, Eric Bischoff's idea for the next big thing was Glacier. And Mortis and Wrath. That was the Mortal Kombat thing was going to be the next big thing in wrestling, folks. So good thing the stars aligned for WCW.
Well, no kidding. But you remember Bad Blood and Johnny B. Bad. And although Johnny B. Bad is the only one that worked, that worked. Mark Merrill just took that character and ran with it. But all the others, what was Matt Bourne's name? Big Josh.
Big Josh, yeah. And
just the Firebreaker Chip. I mean, it got the thing done. Forget it. I mean, it got so bad for a while. I mean, beyond parody bad. Look, you can't. This is why to this day I said, don't let non-wrestling people into wrestling. And now all these years have passed, and everybody's a non-wrestling person that's in wrestling, and it sucks. I'm sorry. I mean, I find it very hard to cotton to a lot of what goes on today. I won't even mention any leagues here because you don't have a lot of time, but I am very disillusioned with what they're putting out. For the most part, I think WWE's had a really good couple of months lately, but other than that, I don't point at anything that I really am crazy about. For the first time in my life, I'm missing wrestling on television, not even tuning in. I've never been that way. But you see the gray chin hairs here? They don't want me. They don't want me watching. They don't care about me, even though I've watched my whole life. They want Becky, who's 18, and Timmy, who's 20.
Yeah.
And they want them to order the championship titles and, come and spend $681 for ringside seat for WrestleMania. That's what they want. Do I blame them? No. I just don't want to be part of it.
Yeah, and I find myself, especially probably I'd say within the last 10 years, unfortunately, other than a lot of times I'll watch a whole pay-per-view. But the week-to-week television, if I watch, I find myself fast-forwarding through 70% of it to get to what I want to see. And I tell my wife all the time, I just ain't the wrestling fan I used to be. Like I want to see what happened on Raw, but I want to watch it fast enough so I can go back and watch something from 1993 instead. It's just the way it is. I guess it's that expression, they don't make new music for old people. Maybe that's the way it is with wrestling. Maybe they just don't make wrestling because I'm 44 now. So 40, when I hit about 40, it started to diminish on me, but
I hear you. Well, I still think somebody should be brave. Oh, but here's another point about that. Is there anything unfunnier than wrestling comedy?
No.
Every time they try to be funny, it's awful. Am I right or wrong? That's part of it. Secondly is there's got to be a promoter out there somewhere who was brave enough to just pit two people in a ring, tone it down like it used to be, do interviews outside the ring in a sports type manner, right? I'm not saying it has to be, straight laced and looking like AAU wrestling, but just make the people look a little more normal and not so flashy. And wrestling is so overproduced now. I mean, the arenas look like you're trapped inside a PlayStation 5. It's just the noise and tumult and fireworks and everything is loud. Everything's the greatest. The announcers are screaming. The music is loud. And you want to pull your hair out after watching it for 45 minutes. Not to mention wrestlers that take 20 minutes to walk to the ring and other things that have changed. When I started wrestling, when the WWF would come on with the match, the opponents would already be in the ring. They'd make a ring announcement. Ding, ding, ding. And you'd be off to the races. Boy, do I miss that, too. I just do. It's over. Everything is hyped to the point of give me a break. Give my ears and mind a break. Everything. You know what I mean? It's like the way records are mixed these days. Everything is high. Everything's mixed for headphones now as opposed to stereo.
Yes.
And it's like it's grating on the nerves after a while. All that noise tumult kind of makes you sick.
And wrestling shouldn't look as slick and sanitized as
No, wrestling was best when it had a hard edge to it.
And actually, to be honest,
I was talking to somebody. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I was talking to somebody, and this is the point. Wrestling was better when it wasn't for everybody, when they weren't courting everybody. Remember when it was kind of like a secret that you and your friends had that you wouldn't talk about in school, but you would all go to the matches? You know what I mean? It was different. The whole vibe of it was different back then. It was like the secret thing. It's like your stash of Playboy magazines in your bedroom. You didn't tell people about it, but you really enjoyed it.
Right, exactly. Actually, I was going to say, to me, the most enjoyable, and again, I watch the new stuff. I keep up, I guess, but the most fun I have watching a wrestling show now is I actually watch OVW on YouTube. Al Snow is doing a great job with OVW, and they put their show on YouTube every single week. And it's indie, so they have some indie-rific guys or whatever, but it's the closest thing to wrestling that's out there that I enjoy it.
You just gave me a tip because I had no earthly idea that OVW was on YouTube because I'm the biggest Al Snow fan there is. I think he's teaching these guys to do it the right way. If you've ever heard talk about, wrestlers protecting themselves and being safe in the ring. We need more of that.
Yes.
And Al is a proponent. So now I know what I'm doing when I go home after this taping. I think I'm going to tune in because it's like, that sounds interesting. Thank you for that tip, man. I didn't even know that. I knew it was on somewhere. I didn't know it was YouTube.
There are hundreds. Yeah, they have hundreds of episodes of their TV on YouTube. So
too good, man. Well, and that's my other saving grace too. I've talked about it in my podcast. Guys like Dave Dynasty and Chris P. Lettuce, who was Armstrong Alley on YouTube. Hours and hours and hours of obscure old school wrestling. I mean, it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
Every federation you can name. Chris P. Lettuce is like a hero, and so is Dave. Where they came up with these tapes, I have no earthly idea. How the heck did you have 5 years worth of Bruiser Bedlam tapes? Dave went out and got the original cartridges that they used in broadcast. He's trying to digitize them now. These guys are serious about digging up the old stuff, and it is heavenly. Talent great.
Well, I guess on that note, I will let my prisoner, Mr. Bob Smith, free for the evening. But Bob, I want to really thank you.
Go on and on because it's like you get me started on the old school stuff, and I can't shut it off. You know why? Because I'm trying to impart the love that we all had when we were kids. Why let that feeling go? I mean, we can. I guess we can rely on each other for information, and this is why I like going on other podcasts and have other podcasters come on mine. You're going to be on my podcast too, by the way, whether you like it or not. So, this is part of the deal now. So you got to come on. But seriously, there's a community out there of disaffected older wrestling fans. I intend to exploit this, and Brian Solomon does, and you do, and a bunch of other people, and that's great because it's like. We want to buy tickets too. We would go to the arena if there's something to watch.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what to say other than this year we've lost some wrestlers, and Jerry Jarrett really got to me when he died because it was like the old school guys that knew the psychology are waning by the day. There's less of them as the weeks go by. You read the obits and stuff. It's been a bad year for it too. So when they leave us, that's one less educational voice to teach today's wrestlers what worked for 50 years. It's going to be up to the people who follow them, like you and me, to let people know about them and remind people that wrestling used to be different and good. And we really enjoyed it. Whether a young person would look at a match from 1977 and think it was good, or they're just a bunch of guys standing around the ring, who knows? But I just want to educate people to the difference and let them make their own minds up whether they'd like to pursue old school stuff or to say, it's a bunch of old men. What do they know? It's up to them. Yeah. But as far as when you listen, did you have a good time talking to me?
Absolutely.
I had a good time talking to you. This is what it's about. Let's have some fun. Life is short. I'm getting old too. So it's like, I intend to have as much fun with this as I can to whenever I stop doing the podcast. So it's, and I've been having a blast, man. I've reconnected with people I haven't seen for 30 years. So how can I complain? This is fun.
And speaking of that, as we wrap here, do you want to go ahead and let everybody know about your podcast, where they can find it, where they can find you on social media? I'm sure you have more listeners than I do, but you might get some of my listeners out of this.
Oh, I wouldn't bet on that. It is called the Outdated Wrestling Hour. The motto of the show is all new, all old. And we are available, I am proud to say, if you can name a podcast app, we're there. All of them. Some that even I didn't hear of and have no idea how it ended up there. The obscure ones like Rephonic and Podbay and stuff like that. We're also on Spotify and Amazon and Audible. And think of a podcast. We're on Samsung News, which comes free with your Samsung phone. But there's a podcast section in there. We're on there too. If you have a podcast app, chances are it's there. I can't think of a single one that we're not on. So I think my company's done a really good job getting it out and disseminated. If you want to find me, I have a Gmail address, which is the same as the show, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook as Bob Smith. You'll see me singing with BB King. I don't know if I I don't talk about this on the podcast a lot, but I was a blues singer for 15 years and traveled the whole country. So you can see me singing with BB King on the face of the Facebook page. Just look for Bob Smith, look for me and BB King. Where else should I send you? We have a website where you can hear all the shows. It's just called outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. All the shows are there. If you know, I think that's enough. It's mainly where I'm at. And because how did I meet you? Facebook?
Actually,
Facebook. Link up a little bit.
Yeah, actually, I think we actually met through a Resi, because I was on a Resi show with you for an episode, and then we linked up on Facebook after that.
You were really?
Yeah, I was one of the patrons.
I don't remember this.
I was one of the patrons, so I got to.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Yeah,
that's right. Okay. So why weren't you on the main show? You should have been on the main show. What gives?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, all right. I don't want to open a can of worms. I have enough worms in that can anyway, so I'm not gonna even pursue it. But listen, I say it every week. If I get no more successful than I'm right now, I'm happy, because talking with you and people like you, I feel 50 years younger. I'm telling you, I feel it's just so good to go back and relive the stuff you really enjoyed. Like you're talking about Memphis and stuff like that. I mean, every time I talk about my trip there, it's like a tonic, it feels really good. So thank you for allowing me to do that. I really appreciate it.
Yes. And thank you for joining me. And like we said, check out Bob's podcast, The Outdated Wrestling Hour, which I'm now booked for. Yeah, there we go. And
yes, you are.
Thank you so much, Bob, for joining me.
And I just want to say, to be part of your 200th show, honestly, I feel privileged, and I've been binging on it, gang. Ever since I knew I got this booking, I've been listening back through. There's some great shows. You got to hear the ones that they did about the Hall of Shame and the worst tag teams. This show's a lot of fun, and I'm glad to be on it. And tell the other people on the show that I said hi, because they're all doing a fantastic job, and I recommend it wholeheartedly to everybody that listens.
I take that as high praise. Thank you, Bob. All right, everyone. It is my pleasure here, as part of the 200th episode of the We Can't Wrestle podcast, to welcome a man who, as Lex Luger would say, has many allocades in the wrestling sphere. Historian, podcaster, former manager, and definitely historian. That's the big one. I am pleased to have on the show Mr. Dave Dynasty. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Well, thanks, Nate, and congratulations on episode 200. Quite the milestone.
Yeah, it's it's like we started this in 2017, so it's been a long road getting here, but it's been a blast, and it's great to sit down with people and talk about pro wrestling. Talk about the things that you love. That's why we do this. So.
Yeah, that's about the only reason sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, no shit. So I guess we'll start, just have a little conversation here, but we'll start at the beginning. Okay. We all, no matter what we do in the wrestling sphere, whether we podcast, whether we are actually in the business, whether we are a journalist, what have you, it all starts with being a fan. Yep. And I was just wondering, what was that moment for Dave Dynasty as a young Dave Dynasty? What was the one that you got the glint in the eye for professional wrestling and became a fan of the business?
Well, that would have been the very early 80s, probably right around 80, 81-ish. And I have it all to thank my grandmother for, because my grandmother was a wrestling fan. She watched everything she could get, and I spent a lot of weekends at my grandmother's, pretty much virtually every weekend. And so when I was there, she was watching it, so I started watching it, and I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. This is kind of fun. These guys are great. And I was born and raised in Central Indiana, which at that time was pretty unique, because we got Bruiser stuff out of Indianapolis off that station, but we were close enough to Louisville also that we got the Memphis stuff off of Louisville. We could pick that up. Shortly thereafter, my family got a satellite dish in the backyard, not the direct TV satellite dish. This is the Mongo or whatever they were, 10
right.
foot.
Yes. Looks like a flying saucer. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're out there and someone's changing the channel, it would move, and it was pretty daunting. But my dad got one of those for us, and that opened up a whole new world, because where I live, we couldn't get cable. But on that though, I could get cable channels. So I started then watching, that's where I started getting Crockett stuff and Georgia stuff. I would peruse through it. My first glimpse of Lucha Libre on that. And, we could get the Madison Square Garden network, the Spectrum network out of Philly. So I got those WWF shows on those networks. But it all started with my grandma, like I said, and I was hooked, and I would consume anything that I could see, buy anything. I would watch it. I didn't care what it was.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I'm around the same time as you. Like I was about 5, so probably about 1983, and I grew up in Toledo, Ohio.
Oh,
so I got we got the WWF syndicated stuff, and it's funny because and you'd think it wouldn't be like that, but when I was a kid, Fox 55 in Detroit actually had Bruiser's promotion, but it was never consistent. It was like filler programming. So one night I might be able to catch it. It might be on at midnight, but then the next day or the next week it might be on at 11 a.m. or something. Yeah. So kind of followed that around too. But yeah, I'm right about in the same sphere as you in the early 80s. But and it caught me. The first thing I remember seeing. The first thing I remember seeing actually was a WWF show on TV. It was right before Hulkamania, and it was Backlund was still the champion. Hogan had just come in, and they had a tag match. I think it was All Star Wrestling, maybe. I don't even know, but they wrestled Mr. Fuji and Tiger Chung Lee.
Yeah.
And I vividly remember the Victory Sports flag. And when I met Hulk Hogan, I told him, I'm like, this is my first memory of wrestling. And he goes, brother, I don't even remember that. So
yeah, that's what, like I said, my grandma took me to my first live show when I was around that same time, because Bruiser would sporadically do spot shows, because my grandma was from a little town called Edinburgh, Indiana. It's a very small town. And they would sporadically, maybe once a year, would come to the high school in the gym there. And that was my first. I don't remember a whole lot of the show itself. Just remember the feel, walking in, seeing my first ring in person. It was great. I mean, it was, that sealed the deal even more. But she took me to my first live show too. She had a big influence on my life, but yeah, wrestling was probably the biggest one.
And Bruiser's promotion, I know there's a lot of people around the country actually probably now know a lot more about it than they did back then. A lot of that is because of you. And
I try
the content that you share, and the I love the historical facts that you put on your Facebook page, and just the history. And would you say that is your favorite promotion of all time? I know I know that it's the one that you are the noted historian on, but that doesn't even necessarily mean it's your fave.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be my favorite. It is the one nearest to my heart for nostalgic reasons, because I was born and bred on it. That was that was like the home team, right? It was the home sports team. But no, probably, I mean, my favorite stuff is still 80s Crockett stuff. I love that stuff. I religiously watched all that. At 6:05 Saturday night, it was that was a date for me every week, and all that stuff. And that's probably still my favorite stuff. The early 80s world class. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if it's hard to say that. Like I said, I guess it would be considered my favorite for nostalgic reasons, and I have the most memories of it. As far as just pure watching product, no, I don't think it's necessarily my favorite. Although I will, there's not necessarily the television product, but I will hold 70s WWA stuff up with about anything. It was some it was some good stuff. They were major, and they were drawing big. So, but in the 80s, some of the bloom had fallen off the rose, and it wasn't. It was still fun for me, but no, I don't know. I don't know if I would define it as my favorite to watch, purely on product wise. But
yeah, and I can see that. I mean, I agree with you on. I like to watch the early '80s world class, probably until I like world class probably until after David died. Then it fizzles and it gets repetitive and little. I mean, I don't know. And then Fritz and his promotional tactics and stuff. But then the resurgence of that. I personally could sit down and watch Global.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All day long. I don't know, that promotion doesn't get, I guess maybe because of the kid in me that watched it on ESPN after school.
Yeah.
But that was so cool to me just because it was something different. It was like, I've never seen something like this before. And I love that promotion, and it just doesn't get enough credit or enough love, I don't think.
Yeah. It's kind of the same with me with mid to late 80s AWA stuff that was on ESPN. That show gets pissed on
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets pissed on so much, and I get it, but man, I was so hot and knee deep into it at that time. And when, watching it, and man, I thought it was fun. And I wasn't aware at that time of the, the AWA and the Prime so much, I hadn't seen a lot of that. So I didn't know. But I again, a lot of it is nostalgia for me. It hits certain marks in my heart when I watch it. But I still love watching that stuff. I still think it's fun to watch. It's, that's what it's all about for me. It's not, I don't, I like to critique. I like to bitch and complain about certain things, but it's just, if it's fun, if I enjoy and have a good time watching it. So
no, I'm the same way. I'm 90% more likely when I sit down at night, if I have time to sit down and watch some wrestling, I'm probably just going to watch something old and not something new. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's like I was actually for the show, I was talking just the other day, I was talking to Bob Smith. I know you were on his show, and it's like I told him, it's that expression. I think they don't make new music for old people.
Mm-hmm. And
I feel that way sometimes about new wrestling. I keep up, I watch, but I watch from afar. It's not like appointment viewing for me anymore.
No, me neither. And it used to. Even up into the 90s and the early 2000s, it was for me. Through the Monday Night Wars and all that. I didn't miss, and I was flipping back and forth and taping one and everything. It was all through that. But it's anymore. I don't really watch a whole lot. I'll go and I'll watch just certain things that I know I like, and or certain something that I saw online was maybe something I should check out, or. I get caught up in that, I guess, that short attention span mindset of nowadays. And, I read the results online and just watch pick and choose what I want to watch.
Same.
And there's just not anything current out there that overall just grips me where I can sit down and watch start to finish and it really holds my attention all the way through. So it's tough. I wish there was something out there for me. But
I'm the same way. Every once in a while, and a lot of times, and I hardly ever watch anything live anymore because I want to be able to fast forward through it.
Yep,
WWE does a good job with their pay-per-views, but I still fast forward through some of it. The last show I watched in its entirety from beginning to end and really enjoyed it. I did enjoy this most recent Forbidden Door show. I thought that was really good. But
I watch it.
So as far as your career in the wrestling business, I know you were a manager at one point, and I can tell just by looking at the pictures, you may have been a Jim Cornette fan.
Definitely. Yeah. I was always a Cornette fan, always a Midnight Express fan. And there was, the local promotion around us. When I got into, my 20s, I started realizing that there was stuff around me that I could go see, and that, it was fun. And I went and got, I would talk to guys and this and that. And it would just be certain things, and I'd start talking, the guy that owned it, and how I got into it is I would talk to him and I was like, hey, I saw your flyer up, man, you ought to do this. Right. And he's like, well, fuck you, do it for me then. I was like, okay, fine. I'll make your flyer. So I made a flyer, and this is pre-Photoshop days. I was cutting in photos and pasting and stuff like that. And I'd come up with stuff. So, and then I would start, doing things where I would tell him, hey, you ought to have some kind of, little program thing, just basic, something. I'm like, you can sell them for $1 a piece and it's easy money. And he's like, okay, fine. If you want it, do it. And I'll split it with you or whatever. And so I started making programs and writing these little, kayfabe stories in them and things like that. And, so when that, so I started showing up early to the shows and helping with the ring and doing all these things and getting to know these guys. And then just, that evolved into getting into the ring with these guys, right? And they would just show me little bits here and there, right? I'll take a flat back bump, how to do this and that. And I thought, man, I love this, right? This is great. And I had it in my mind. I thought, I'm going to say something. I want to do something, right? I want to become involved somehow. I don't care what it is. And he approached me first, and he's like, hey, you ought to manage. We don't really have a heel manager, right? We don't have that guy. You want to do that? I'm like, yes. When do you want me to do it?
Sign me up. Yeah.
And so I started doing it, right? And it was very much modeled after Cornette, right? The rich, entitled kind of guy who, thought everything should be given to him, blah, blah, blah. And man, it was a rush, right? I enjoyed it, everything about it, right? And that led, I did actually wrestle for a while as I, trained a little more with these guys before shows and did some of that until I got to the point where I had a pretty bad neck injury. I had a weird weekend of shows where I had several bad bumps that were all on the neck. And it ended up years later, I had to have fused 2 discs in my neck because of this. But at that time, they told me, hey, there's not much we can do now, there's whatever else, but you really shouldn't do this anymore. So I was like, okay, well, I won't, right? I'll quit. And so that led to I don't want to get away, right? I don't want to step away from the business. I still want to be a part. So I started promoting shows, right? In a neighboring town to us. I started running monthly shows there and loved that, right? I loved being on that creative side of it. And so I've always had my finger in it in one way or another, right? Once I got in, it is truly the saying that you never retire is true, right? Once you get addicted to it and you get in it, man, seems like you're always involved. So that's, I did, ran shows, several different times ran shows. And then when that kind of ran its course, that's when I kind of transitioned to the podcast thing and thought, well, now this is where it's at. I can do this and I can kind of stay involved and do this and talk, because I can always talk. And,
Same.
So that's what I did.
For all intents and purposes, was there any, I don't want to say, any promotions that you worked for that I might know the name?
Probably not. It was a lot of probably the most prominent at that time. I did a couple shows in Chicago for Windy City Wrestling.
Okay,
some of their spot shows. It wasn't anything major. It was just some of their small peripheral shows. And it was more that case of just going and showing up and being there. And there was a guy that I managed at the time that did this outlaw cowboy type gimmick, right? That, that roughed up, independent Stan Hansen type kind of guy. Not to compare him to Stan Hansen, but you know what I mean?
Right.
And he was there, and then they had the spot, and they're like, okay, well, you can work this. And, all right, this is my manager. So that's how we kind of got in. I did a few shows there. I did some shows. There was a group called EWF in Marion, Indiana that ran out of an old theater. They were pretty prominent at that time as far as independents go. Worked some shows for them. It was just a lot of stuff. It was a lot of small groups like that. It was so weird back then. It was because, I was literally part of the, printing out getting a picture made, typing up a letter and doing a videotape of highlights. And then ultimately kind of a DVD and sending to these guys, right? Because there was no online presence, and trying to get booked. But it was, it's hard. It was hard to get booked as a manager, right? And that's primarily what I wanted to do, is just the managing stuff. So, but because almost every group had a heel manager. It was somebody's friend or someone's brother or whatever that did the heel manager thing. So they didn't need another heel manager. So a lot of times it was going with the guy that I was already working with. A lot of times.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, being from around kind of the same geographic area that you're from. Like where I live now is in between Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Lima, Ohio. So, so just being in the general area, that was it's funny that you say that about the manager, because going to those shows back then, and that's another thing that I miss is, and I know there's still indie wrestling out there, but it's just not. It's not what it was then, going to the armory, going to the dirty armory. And like you said about the manager, this promotion has a manager. Oh, he's got a big pimp hat on. He's not really doing anything to get heat. He's just, you just know he knows the promoter, and he's just, he's wearing a pimp hat and a boa.
Yeah.
But also some of the funniest interactions that I've seen from people are those guys. Sometimes you'll find one, or you'd see one, and it's like, oh, this guy's this guy's killer. He's great, a great heel, But
yeah. Once I worked with some of these guys, they liked it because, I would take bumps, right? I'd take whatever. And I wasn't just that, that manager who only talked and did nothing. I would take a bump or take a move. I didn't care. And I'd do whatever. But, I did, I did all the old school heel manager gimmicks. I got put in a diaper one show because I lost an arm wrestling contest to the local DJ. And I, did ate the dog food because my guy got beat in a match and got locked in a cage. And I got, quote unquote, tarred and feathered. It didn't really work real well, but they supposedly tarred and feathered, and did the, handcuffed to people, the local officer. I did all that kind of stuff and all the little gimmick stuff. But that's, when you had the rotating cast of guys in and out all the time and not knowing who would actually show up, the heel manager oftentimes was the backbone, right? It was the guy that was there. It was like, Jimmy Hart in Memphis, right? He was the guy that was always there.
Right.
So that's who Lawler feuded with. And whoever happened to be with him, that's, by default it happened. I was always there. So I was always the guy with the stipulations. And if a guy whoever showed up, and that's who I managed. And it was wild because, it was like I said, it was these small shows, but it's like, to me, I worked with and managed so many guys that, man, it blew my mind that wouldn't matter. I mean, first guy I ever managed was a guy named Psycho Sam Cody, who I'd seen on TV for different shows. And I worked a lot with Bobo Brazil Jr., who used to be Calypso Jim on Bruiser's TV. And that just, stuff like that. And I worked a lot with Dice Man Ronnie Vegas, who, had done a lot of prelims on WCW. And just all these guys. And to me, that blew my mind. I got to work a match with Dutch Mantell one time, and it was just
sweet.
And it was one of the wildest. And it was so funny because it's like I was obviously much younger than him, and we were doing this thing, and I backed him in the corner, right, laid in a couple shots, and went to whip him across, and he grabbed the rope, and he goes, "No, kid, I'm not running all the way across that ring." So it's like, okay. So he's like, snap me out and grab a chin lock. So it's like, all right, Dutch, whatever, buddy.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mantell.
I just, he called it, but he wasn't about to, on this little bitty show in Central Indiana, he wasn't about to overexert himself and from post to post. So
he's definitely a character.
Yeah.
My favorite Dutch Mantell story, and I can't remember who I actually heard tell it, was Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler, I guess, at one point had called like a meeting of all the people in Memphis. Yeah. And it was during the steroid days, when Vince was going through all his stuff, and either Jerry Jarrett or Jerry Lawler said, "We want to make sure nobody on this roster is on steroids." And Dutch said, "The way you're paying us, nobody's on food."
Yeah. And
I'm like, that's such a good line. Nobody's on food. I don't remember where.
It's great. Yeah. But I'm telling you, all the stories you hear and all the things you've seen laid out in documentaries and movies about wrestling locker rooms, even these small shows, it's all true. Right. You see so much stuff. It's so funny. I mean, some of the things you saw that you would never believe you'd encounter. And but that was part of the fun of it for me, right? The personalities in this wild outlaw kind of world it's so fun, right? Because it's the same reasons that you watch it, right? You work a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, and you watch this, whether it be wrestling or whatever it is, to escape that, right? To get your mind off that. And it's the same thing, when I wrestled, doing, being the weekend warrior kind of guy, it was just, man, forget the dull life and, do this. So.
Well, my favorite people to talk to as a podcaster, to be honest with you, is guys like you that are historians, and because it's fascinating to me. Like I've had Barry Rose on, and we talked about Florida, and Brian Solomon was on to talk about the Sheik and to talk about his days at the WWF. And I always wonder, and I'll ask you, as far as your historical thing, the things that you have chronicled, and like I said, your YouTube page and stuff like that, did you acquire all that over time and just, from your own stuff, or did you have to buy some of it from somebody, or
a little of all of it? Yeah. A lot, I had kind of the core of it to start, right? It was from my stuff, right, that I had accumulated and whatever else. And I used to do a lot of tape trading, right? So I had a lot of stuff from that. And then it gets to the point where when the online world kind of started, right? And social media, and you get on there and you start meeting people or being reacquainted with people. And then there's a lot of, what would be called legwork, but it's all mostly online anymore. It seems like,
right.
Where you encounter someone and you find out that, well, this person is so-and-so from back in the day, their kid, right? And then, so you reach out and you say, hey, you don't happen to have, any pictures, any flyers, any tapes laying around in boxes from when your dad worked, and just different stuff, like reaching out. You see a post where someone said they used to go to shows and at the Tyndall Armory in Indianapolis and used to religiously watch it on TV. So you reach out, hey, did you ever take pictures? Did you ever record any of that show? You don't happen to have any. They're like, oh, actually I do. And so they would, and you dig it out, and sometimes people would just be willing to share, and whatever. Or sometimes you buy, and I constantly peruse eBay and everything else. You have alerts set up for that. And it's and then, my best friend's, newspapers.com, the subscription to that. And it's just, I spend more time on that, going down rabbit holes, and it's wild. And like specifically, like with the WWA, there's lots of, well, not just the WWA, that particularly, there's gaps in title change dates and things, right? Where they weren't documented. And obviously there's actually, there's times where titles changed in one town, but not in the other. There's all kinds of weird stuff. So I'm constantly going out and trying to piece together and see if I can narrow down and find these dates, right? From results, from newspaper ads, and figure this stuff out. And then talking to people, hey, you worked this show. Do you know, when you worked it, were you still tag champ? Yep, I was still tag champ on that show. We didn't lose them till later. So, okay, well, I can narrow it down a little further, right? It wasn't that show where the title. So it's just a lot of that. It's and making relationships, right? Meeting people, getting to know them, and just bugging the hell out of them. I do it all the time, right? All the time. Anybody that I reach out to and they're like, oh, let me check. I will not let them forget, right? I'll give them some time, and then I'm always back in contact. And even if it's just one picture or something that's never been seen before, I feel like, it was worth the effort. And so it's a wide combination of things of my collection and purchasing and picking at other people's stuff and other people sharing and participating, and it takes a lot of time, right? And meeting people and talking to people. And a lot of these people, especially a lot of old timers, they're very tentative, right? It's like, it's weird that they're protective. They don't want you to, they want to make sure you're going to be respectful and things like that. And not, it's like, I don't know what you think I'm going to do with this stuff, but
right.
I'm not putting it online to make fun of you, but and I get that though. You're right. Some of these guys have forgotten, and this was their life's work, right? And this was their career. And it's the same way when you try to interview guys like on podcasts, and you'll reach out, hey, I'd like to interview you. And a lot of these guys, some of their first reactions is, nobody'd want to hear me talk. Why would they want to hear me talk? And I'm like, really? Do you not? I mean, you've got so many stories to tell. You not understand? I mean, nobody cares about that. That was 30 years ago. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, they do. Yeah, there's a lot of people who would care, and they're just not aware, right? They're not aware that there's this, demand for the nostalgia and demand for a lot of these things, and that especially if you find guys that haven't done 100 interviews already, and someone unique. It's there's definitely a demand for it out there.
Well, that was one of some of my experiences. Just a couple. Well, obviously Chad Austin is the co-host on Reliving the Extreme with us. And, you reach out to a guy that somebody might say was, never a big deal in the business, but Chad was a big deal in Maryland, and turns out, lo and behold, super personality, so it transitions very well over to podcasting. Another guy, Tommy Cairo. I had Tommy Cairo on the ECW show. You don't even realize, this guy, he knew Johnny Rods, and et cetera. So you can go I went down these wormholes with Tommy that, God damn it, I never even recorded it because we were just on the phone, just talking about him coming on the show. And it's like, I should have hit record. But you're absolutely right.
There's a guy named Chris Carter who was big in Bruiser's group. from the early 80s up through till the end, right? In the late 80s. And man, as a kid, I loved this guy, right? Loved him. And he did a heel turn on Dr. Jerry Graham Jr. that was just tragic for me as a kid, all this stuff. And I had tried for years to track this guy down, could not find it. And then finally found someone who had a number for him. And I just cold called the guy, right? I'm just like, hey, I'm this. And he's like, you do what's a podcast? He's like, he had no clue what any of this was. He's not online at all. And I'm like this. And he's like, what are you even talking about? And I'm like, he's like, I'm not in the wrestling business anymore. I'm like, I get that. And he's like, no, do you need a piano? He had a piano moving business now. That's what he does. He owns a piano moving business. And then it's like, he had all this personality back in the day, right? And when you get on there and talk to him and get him started, it all was back, right? He slipped into that personality again. It was so entertaining, and had never done an interview before. And it was so. There's a great Wojo who was another big guy for Bruiser's Group.
Mm-hmm.
Never done a podcast interview, and it was he's very quiet, very secluded. Finally got him to do an interview, and it was great, right? And these are guys that a lot of people aren't aware of, but to me, they were big deals when I was a kid watching Bruiser's TV, and it's like, but they don't think anybody cares. They don't think anybody remembers. And I'm like, well, there are a lot of people that remember, and if they don't remember, then let's remind them, right? Let's change that, because you deserve, a little attention. I mean, you deserve to be able to tell your stories, because these guys, they might have worked these little territories, but Chris Carter was in Detroit. I mean, he worked WWF, preliminary matches every time they came through Detroit. So he worked some of the biggest names at that time in preliminary matches when they came through Detroit. Never worked for WWE or WWF per se, but he wrestled on these shows, and worked for the Sheik and wrestled all these guys and everything. I'm like, how can you think that nobody wants to hear these stories?
Oh, I was so excited when I saw that you were going to have Wojo on your show. Yeah. Because one of my memories as a kid was I actually watched the great Wojo wrestle Scott Steiner at the Lucas County Rec Center in Toledo. Yep. I was there as a kid. That's awesome. Yeah. And so I just, when I hear that name, oh, he's going to be on Dave's show. I don't think he's ever done an interview. I was chomping at the bit to hear that.
And this guy, even outside of he was an Olympic wrestling alternate, right? Mm-hmm. Should have went to the Olympics in 1980, or whatever it was, but we boycotted, right? He was planning, he was going to go. This guy's, he's legit, right? This guy can mess you up. He was, had all the backgrounds, and, but again, he was just, once he was done, he was done. He went to coaching wrestling in a high school or whatever, and put it behind him and didn't care anymore about it. And I'm friends with Jerry Jaffe, who was Dr. Jerry Graham Jr., and who's friends with Wojo. And I just kept telling him, Jerry, you got to ask him, right? Ask him. He's like, oh, Wojo won't do it, right? He doesn't do interviews. He doesn't want to. Jerry, just ask him for me. I said, Jerry, buddy, just vouch for me. Just tell him Dave's a good guy. I said, I don't care if you lie. Just tell him, right? Just trust Dave. Finally, one day, he's like, Jerry's funny because he won't just text me or message me, right? It's always he'll send me a message. Hey, Dave, call me for a minute. So I'll call you. Jerry, what's up? I talked to Wojo. Yeah. He's like, here's his number. He said, call him. He'll talk to you about it. I'm like, holy cow, okay. And I'm like, how do you call great Wojo, right? To me, it's like this guy, and but he's so soft-spoken and quiet. And I'm like, and I called him, and he's like, all right, yeah, I think I could do this. What do I have to do? I'm like, you don't do anything. You just sit there and talk to me on the phone. I'll ask you questions, tell your stories. We'll talk about whatever you want to do. It's simple. I'm like, you tell me how long you can go. I'll, whatever. We'll just do it. He's like, all right, well, what are you going to do with this? And I'm like, well, I'm going to put it in a podcast. He said, what's a podcast? I'm like, well, Wojo, it's kind of like modern day radio, right? This is where people get a lot of this stuff that they're interested in. Oh, all right. Well, okay. And then we get to the end. I'm like, well, do you want me to reach out to you when it's done? And, no, I don't. He's like, he didn't care.
I don't want to hear it. I don't want
whatever. Do what you want to do. And, but it was, it was so exciting. And I love getting first time guys like that, right? Because it's exciting for me. And, and I know it's, you feel that sense of accomplishment, right? Because these are people that don't do these things. And, so it's cool to be able to put something out there. And I feel that, I mean, like the historian, I feel this sense of needing to document these things, right, and preserve them while you can, and let them, whether they're true, not true, whether they're kayfabing or bullshitting, let these guys tell their stories, tell their perspectives, let them just rattle it all off and preserve it, and while you can, because I mean, we lose these guys so quick that and I hate to think of these guys that think they were nothing, that never got to do that.
And it's funny that you mentioned the podcast chronicling things, because my next question was actually going to be to ask you about that. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, another man who has 200 episodes under his belt. Yeah, Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. Check it out if you have not. I know I've shared it in our Facebook group and stuff before, but one of my favorite podcasts. And that's what I was going to ask, was the question of transitioning from being in the business and then starting to do podcasting. Was it more just wanting to stay around the business, or was it the intention to chronicle, to start chronicling things?
It was both, right? There was multiple facets, right? But honestly, the initial idea was, it was selfish. It was just to stay involved. And I thought, I'll get to talk to guys. And that's my chance to be like, I'm still in the locker room chatting up with these guys, right? I'll get to talk with them. I'll let them tell their stories. And then you do some, and you think, okay, well, I need a little focus, right? I can't just be all over the place, right? We have to have a niche. So I thought, okay, so I'm going to focus in on the Midwest, because that's my thing. I know more people there. That's my big interest. That's what I grew up with. So I thought, well, I'm going to do a lot of history stuff, right? I'm going to try to get some of these guys that have never done interviews, and I'm going to document a lot of this stuff. And then early on, though, I also wanted to get a lot of young guys in the Midwest that were just breaking in, that I thought had a lot of potential, right? Had a lot of talent. And I thought, I'm going to bring them on, right? And try to give them whatever little bit of exposure I could. For the first, I don't know, damn near 100 episodes, one of our prominent, pretty much every week on was Mance Warner, right? I knew Mance Warner, who, has done everything, right? He's been in AEW now, MLW, all these things he does. I mean, he's great. But he's from Indiana. And I was running shows and booked him on a show when he was first got done training. And I would talk to he was so quiet at that time. And I would talk to him or whatever else. And I kept saying, man, you can talk. I know you got to talk. And he's like, well, I don't know, man. No one lets me talk. I'm a kid. I said, dude, I got a podcast. I said, I will give you 10 to 15 minutes every week. I said, you say whatever the hell you want. I don't even care what you say. Do it in your character, what you want to be, and just do it. And he's like, all right. And he called me. He's like, I would do this thing. I would call it Warner's Wisdom. I said, I don't care, man. I don't care. Just, you're so entertaining. Just talk. And that's what he would do. You could tell that he was in the car going to shows, and he would just be doing like voice notes on his phone. And he would just be rambling for 10 minutes and send me these things. And I thought, oh, it's so cool. It's so fun. And in my mind, it's entertaining, but it's also this young guy getting to practice, right? He's getting a chance to talk and to practice. I'm like, I like that, right? It's a service. I thought it was cool. And so there was, like I said, there was a lot of selfish reasons, because I wanted to stay in touch with these guys. I didn't want to just be one of those guys that stopped and then just, it's once you're out of eye, you're out of mind, right? People forget about you. And I still wanted to stay in touch with these people I had met and were friends with. And I still, so I thought, and obviously then I wanted to do a lot of the historical stuff. I wanted to help young guys. I don't do a lot of the young guy stuff anymore, because I'm not in Indiana anymore. I don't live there anymore. So I don't go to a lot of shows. So I don't have my finger on the pulse of who's who anymore.
Right.
So I don't do as much of that anymore. So I've really focused on the historical stuff. And if I'm not doing an interview with someone or letting someone tell their stories, I focus in on whatever it might be, a particular show, a particular match, a particular person from the past. And I've just focused in on that on the show, and either bring people on that were there or knew that person, or just from my own research, just tell the story and do stuff like that. So, so it's a little combination of all that stuff, but now it's pretty much evolved to the point where it's almost primarily the chronicling of history is what I tend to use it for. So.
And I love it. So, like I say, I can't put enough praise on the show and recommend it enough to anybody that listens to this show, because most of the people who listen to this show are also old school wrestling fans. So, kind of the same vein. So another thing, as far as the podcasting goes, I know you branched out away from wrestling, which actually I'll be kind of announcing on this episode of on the 200th episode of this show with our network. We are also going to branch out a little bit from wrestling. And you've branched out into the horror genre. I love that show too, because I also love my go-tos are sci-fi and horror and then comedy. So
me too.
Yeah,
it's just another thing. It's like I watch horror movie. It's same as with wrestling. It's always been there in my life, and it's always been such a big thing. And as odd as it may sound, so many horror movies they're comfort movies for me, right? Mm-hmm. They're just movies I throw on and I love, and I especially love cheesy stuff, right? Whether it's horror, whether it's sci-fi, whether it's whatever, I love cheesy stuff. And it was just one of these things with me and Ike, who I do the show with. We're all the time talking about this stuff, and I thought, man, I told him, I said, I don't care if anybody listens to it. Why don't we just start reviewing movies? Let's just do a podcast every week. We watch this stuff anyway, but we go and watch all these new releases. Let's just review it. Let's just do it for fun and have fun. It's just, I told him it's just our chance once a week to make sure we talk horror movies, which we do anyway. And like I said, I like to talk. So I thought, hell, I'm going to do a show then on my other passion. And it's a blast. I love it.
It's just just so you mentioning the cheesy. I think the other reason that horror is one of my favorite genres is there literally are not bad horror movies. And the reason I say that is because a bad horror movie just becomes a comedy. So no matter what, you're going to be like, my wife and I just watched one last night, Attack of the Killer Donuts.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
It was no Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, but you know what? for 85 minutes just to sit down and watch something stupid, and so like I said, I mean, it's such a cool genre, and I do love that show you guys are doing too. It's a great show.
Yeah, and it comes from the same place to me as wrestling does. I watch it to escape, and I don't. So many people get caught up on what's good and what's bad. I don't care, right? If I can watch a horror movie and spend an hour and a half watching it, and it can be a bad movie. Mm-hmm. But if I see one kill or one line or one something in it that makes me react or chuckle, I think, that's fine. I can key in on that, say, I like that part. That was fun. And, I mean, no one makes a horror movie thinking that they're going to, win an Academy Award. It just doesn't happen. So,
yeah.
So, I mean, you hear people that get so caught up in this stuff and think, oh, that's so unreal. I mean, it's a horror movie. I mean, of course it's unreal. I mean, what are you expecting from this? And it's kind of the same approach that I've taken a lot of times with the wrestling podcast. I try to remain positive about it and not, I mean, I will critique a movie if need be or whatever else, but I'll try to counter with some positives. Right. And be supportive, because to me, if someone goes out there and they're going for it, right, and they're making something and putting it out there, they should at least get props for pursuing it and making the attempt. Because there's so many people that say, oh, I'd like to do this, and then they don't ever do anything. They don't. So I'm not, I try to put a lot of positivity into it and make sure I point out good stuff as well as bad when need be.
I'm the same as you. The toxicity nowadays is just, again, like you said, like with wrestling, or I am a huge Star Wars fan.
Me too.
Also yes, within that circle, it's like, okay, I understand as a fan, sometimes maybe as wrestling, I might not like a match, or maybe on Star Wars, I might not like a character, but I guarantee you I'm going to like the overall product.
Yeah.
So I try not to go. It's like these people go to watch a Star Wars movie wanting to hate it.
Yep.
And I can't be with that. So I'm right with you on that. It's just the negativity is just.
Yeah, and if I watch a movie or anything and I don't like it, okay, I'm not going to watch it again. No harm, no foul. Okay, I'm not going to rewatch it. But here's the thing: if I hate a movie and someone else absolutely loved it, that's great. Why does that bother me? How does that affect me?
Exactly.
I'm glad that someone found something they like, because I guarantee there's so many movies that I love that someone would watch it and say, "What a piece of shit." And I'm like, one of my favorite movies. Have you ever heard of a movie from the 80s called Rad? About
Yes.
BMX?
Yes.
One of my favorite movies of all time. I love that movie so much. But I can tell anybody it's not a good movie. If you're looking at it from a critical or an art, it's not a good movie. But I love it. And it's so enjoyable to me. And it's like, so why would I ever go out and try to knock someone else for something? Who cares? I get tired of people that argue opinions like they're facts, because they're not. An opinion's an opinion. And I'll debate people, and I don't mind that. I enjoy that sometimes, right? Debating these things, and that's fun. But when it's all said and done, no one's right or wrong. It's just a taste thing. So people get too caught up in that, and I mean,
they really do. Just like with wrestling, like I one of the biggest points that I make quite a bit on the show, because I try to disseminate between the two. I can understand, say, somebody that's an AEW fan or a WWE fan saying, say the WWE guy says, "I don't like AEW." Okay, that's cool. That's fine. You don't like AEW. Where I have the problem is, it's gotten to the point now where people are they don't critique the promotion. They critique the people that watch the promotion. Like, why are you attacking people? I can say all day long, no, I didn't like that AEW show. But I'm not going to say, oh, that guy in the front row, what a piece of shit, because he likes AEW. What is that? I don't understand. Like you were saying, like.
I get it. I know. And to me, bottom line is, I'm just happy there's another place for guys to work and get paid.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever. I don't care. Again, I don't, because no one's making me watch it. So
exactly.
I don't care if someone else loves it. I'm happy, right? I'm glad when people find a passion and something they like, and that's fine. And it doesn't have to be my passion, and I don't care. So it's like, I mean, we all got our thing. Why can't we just, I'd rather chat with people that have similar interests to me, and instead of worrying about arguing with someone with different interests. It just it doesn't make sense to me. Same.
Well, one more question, Dave, and then I will set you free. But this is a question that I like to ask anybody that I have on the show, because, like I said at the beginning of the interview, it all starts as a fan. So if I've got Dave Dynasty and I say, Dave, you are now only allowed to watch 1 year of one promotion in history. What is the 1 year, one promotion that you're gonna watch?
Oh, mercy. That's a question there.
I know it's a loaded one.
It would probably be, what was it? Was it 89 NWA with the Flair Steamboat stuff and all that? Was that 89 or 88? It would probably be 89. Yep. It would probably be 89 Crockett stuff, because I love, so many people talk about the Flair Steamboat trilogy there. I love that whole thing, because I remember, the Eddie Gilbert, on the studio show saying he was going to bring in a mystery partner, and then it being all that was great, and up to the end, then with carry on with Terry Funk attacking Flair after that third match and moving into that, which was so great. So again, I have a lot of nostalgia for that time and watching that show. But I mean, I was so invested in that stuff. I enjoyed that stuff so much. So I would have to say that if I was backed into a corner, that would probably be, just off the top of my head, probably be my go-to, would be 89 NWA.
Good shit, pal, as Vince would say.
Yep.
Well, Dave, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for being on our 200th episode this time around on the We Can't Wrestle podcast. Dave and I, those of you that don't know, Dave and I have danced around a while trying to hook up and do something for either one of our shows. So it's finally great to have you here.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I appreciate your time. And if you just want to let everybody know where they can find you and anything you want to plug, just go right ahead.
Well, like I said, I'm pretty much out there on everything. You can look up Dave Dynasty. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff for YouTube. I'm typically under Nostalgic Dave Dynasty. I kind of put that nostalgic thing on there because that kind of is very descriptive of me. But I'm on there. Follow me on those. And then the horror podcast is Listen to Their Screams. And I'm pretty much on, again, we're on pretty much every social media platform as Listen to Screams. That's Listen, the number 2 in Screams. And so you can, if you like horror stuff, that's out there too. So, but yeah, I'm easy to find. I like I said, I stay pretty active on all those things. I like to do a lot of postings. Like you said earlier, I like to post a lot of historical dates and newspaper clippings and photos and stuff like that. So yeah, it's all out there. Right?
That's also why I appreciate you being part of our Hall of Fame panel here too. Because I always say, it's just my stupid little podcast, but the Hall of Fame is like my favorite thing to do every year, just because it's such a cool exercise. But yeah, it's fun. Thinking and talking through stuff like that's fun, right? When you start comparing, one guy's career against another and the impact. I mean, that to me, that's enjoyable stuff. That's fun to think through. So. All right, Dave. Well, thank you very much for joining me, and hope to have you back sometime soon. And
absolutely.
Good luck. Good luck going forward, brother.
Absolutely. And once again, congratulations on 200 episodes. You must be a very stubborn man.